Thank you so much for everyone who has logged in. My name is Annet Njoki. I am a lawyer at Njoki and Associates Advocate. This year we have been covering data protection in various sectors. Last Thursday, we did data protection in small and medium-sized enterprises, as we all know them to be SMEs. We also did data protection for non-governmental organizations, as well as data protection for churches. And this week, we will be dealing with data protection in the health sector. When we all think about data protection, I'm trying to put it in my mind, or just to try and figure out. So if someone tells me data protection, what would come to mind? The aim of the webinar, we are going to do it in two fronts. So the aim of the webinar, firstly, is to understand the rights of an individual that relate to access and control of their health data. Secondly, to understand the compliance measures health institutions should have in place following the enactment of the Digital Health Act and other regulations. So our today's presentation will fall in the two scopes. That is to understand the rights of an individual. That can be you, it can be you as an organization, that relate to the access and control of their health data. I know the big elephant in the room, data. We'll tackle that. To understand also, secondly, to understand the compliance measures, health institutions, that is hospitals, insurance agencies, and all those practitioners in the health sector should have in place. So what should you have in place so that you can be you can be data protection compliant? Following the enactment of the new act, the Digital Health Act, and other regulations. Understanding the rights of the individual under the Data Protection Act. The aim of the webinar is also to assist you, because we are all from various sectors. I presume that all of us, most of us, it cannot be all of us, but most of us are in the health sector and in the medical field. So the aim is to help us. Me as a doctor, how can I protect the data of my clients? Me as a manager of this particular hospital, what is this when I hear I am not data protection compliant? Or what am I supposed to do to take care of my client's data? And also you as a data subject or as an individual, once you go to hospital, once you visit a consultant, a specialist, what will you be able to pick and see? This is my data. I don't want to give you my health status, or if I give you, how will you use it? Will you use it against me? Or for how long will you be keeping this information? These are the questions that should be lingering in your mind as you continue. Oh, so for my particular specialist, my gynecologist, how long will they be keeping this information about me? My dermatologist, how long should they be having my health history, and how should they process this data? How should they keep or store it in their hospitals? Those are the things we seek to look at today. The Act applies to all health sectors that control, collect, and process personal data as part of their core business. I want us to really understand that. So it is for all health sectors that collect, control, process personal data as part of their core business, their day-to-day activities. Great. So to understand the rights of an individual, we have regulatory statutes or regulatory frameworks that regulate data protection. Firstly, the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land that governs above all else. It is the first thing that governs everything, which is the Constitution, which guarantees the right to privacy. So you have a right to keep your data private. And for the organization or for the hospital, they ought to, and they must keep your data private. Let's note that that they should and they must keep your data private. This is grounded under Article 31C and D of the Constitution. Also, because today our main subject matter is data protection, in Kenya, we have an act that regulates it. That's the Data Protection Act of 2019, which was enacted and came into effect on 25th November 2019. If you really want to visit the act, you can just search via browser, go to Kenya Law Report and download the act so that you can be able to familiarize yourself. Remember, information is power. So knowing this, you're actually empowering yourself so that you can keep your data private. So the process towards the implementation started in 2020 with the appointment of the Data Protection Commissioner and setting up an office of the Data Protection Office. We call it the ODPC, and it is an independent body, just as the judiciary is independent. Also, the ODPC is independent in its own self, and their main goal is to regulate the data protection of the citizens as a whole. The Act applies to all processing of personal data by any data controller or data processor established or resident in Kenya and who processes personal data while in Kenya. We'll be able to understand who is a data processor. We'll be able to understand who is a data controller, what is personal data, what is data, who is a data subject, and all that. We'll be able to understand and chatbot, something that you really don't understand, or the definition or the keyword that I might use before I continue. Having said that, that was a brief introduction. So I can give you a story, yeah? So you go to hospital. I'm a patient. I will call myself Jane. I go to hospital. I have some ailment in my body. I feel weak. I feel so frail. And I really don't know because I'm a lawyer, so I don't know anything about my body. So I walk into hospital X. And as I walk into hospital X, the first thing you find at receptionist. So the receptionist is there, so beautiful. We call her Salome. So Salome is there. Oh, hi, hi. What's your name? My name is Jane. So how may I help you, Jane? I have come to see the doctor. I am not feeling well. The next thing Jane will ask me, have you been in this hospital before? I say, no, this is my first time. Or yes, for this instance, let's say, no, I have never been to this hospital. Okay. Then she takes my data. She's like, so give me your national ID. So I give her my national ID. She keys in Jane Njoki Kamau. All right. So she asks me, and Jane, where are you from? She lives in Lavington, Nairobi. You have a postal address? Yes, 7532 Nairobi. Okay. So Jane, do you have any insurance that is covering? You're like, yes, NHIF, all right. So you may have a seat, then you'll go to the triage, and later you will see the doctor. So I go and sit and have a seat, and then I head the triage. So for the triage, I'll go and I'll meet a nurse. The nurse is, oh, welcome, Jane. You may have a seat. So what is the problem? And the nurse is there and asks me and tells me, I'm Jane. I'm telling the nurse, oh, my hand, or I'm feeling some stomach upset and everything else. Is like, okay, so what are the symptoms? Do you have any allergies? Remember, this is my information. This is Jane's information. This is personal to her because Jane and Mary are not the same. So you tell the doctor, oh yeah, some stomach upset, I've been feeling nausea, I've been feeling some back pain and some abdominal pain. Then she's like, okay, she writes them. Then she's like, oh, you can get to the weighing scale, you weigh your weight, your height is weighed. And then she's like, all right, you can just sleep over that bed. I can do your heartbeat. I can see your chest is clear. She does everything. Then she tells me, you will be called by the doctor. You may step out. Then I step out as Jane. And I go, I sit down, and as I sit down there, the doctor calls me. This is consultation now. Then the doctor asked me, oh, Jane, so I can see you have these certain symptoms, and for these certain symptoms, can we do your blood test? Can we do urine test? Can we do stool test? That is my data. You know how sensitive it is, you know. So they do the blood test, and from the blood test, they're able to see, oh, actually, Jane has TB. Because from the analysis, Jane has TB. You know, now, if you see it from the point of a doctor, the doctor has a lot of information of who Jane is. And now, here we see this person, you have TB, and it's like, oh, not only do you have TB, you also have H. pylori. Mm. So you're wondering, oh my God, how? No, Jane is she's so depressed, she's like, God. You know, TB, you go for isolation, yeah, because it's a communicable disease. So what comes to your mind? May this information not get out of this room. And yes, that is data. And as we go through along the slides, let's have the story for Jane at the back of our mind. All right? So that we can be able to relate to it as we continue. Great. So the Data Protection Act, just as I said, it is found under Kenya Law Report, and you can get it from the internet. You can browse and see. So it came in force in November 2019, just as I said, and it has some, we call them regulations, like children of the Data Protection Act. And we can see it has three. We have the data protection general regulation, we have the data protection regulation for data controllers and data processors, as well as data protection for compliance and enforcement. You can ask, what are these regulations? These regulations target the different things. So we have the general scope, we have regulations for data controllers and processors, where we're going to be able to define who's a data controller, who is a data processor, and also the compliance and enforcement. This is mainly for health institutions. How can you be compliant with data? Am I a data controller? You should be asking yourself such questions. Am I a data controller? Am I a data processor? So that this can be so practical and real, and for you to be able to understand it. Good. So you can ask yourself, so why did the government, so what raised us to enact the Data Protection Act in 2019? What was the objective? Like, what does it seek to? What is the aim of the act? Just as I said, we have a name for the webinar. So does the act have an aim? Or why is it there? So we can see, to protect the privacy of individuals. It's that serious. Like, your data is so serious that there is an act that you ought to know about it that protects the privacy of you as an individual. Secondly, it ensures that the personal data, which is your data, which is Jane in our story, which is Jane's data, is processed in accordance with the data protection principles, which we will later look at it. Thirdly, to provide for the regulation of processing of personal data. How should my data be processed? Back to our story. So Jane, when she goes to the receptionist, how should the receptionist process her data? Secondly, how should the nurse at the triage process her data? How should the doctor, who now knows that Jane has TB, who now knows that Jane actually has H. pylori and TB, process her data? Also, if they process it wrongly, or they use your data wrongly or against you, what does the law give you remedies, and what rights do you have? You see, it's a powerful act, as you can see. Lastly, it established the legal and institutional mechanisms to protect personal data. If you look at the act, it establishes the office of the Data Protection Commissioner, you know. So that office is the one that regulates data protection. If you have a problem, you will go right to the ODPC and say, so-and-so hospital infringed my data, or so-and-so doctor, consultant, specialist did not adhere to the rights and my principles under the Data Protection Act. So as we go along having Jane's story, at the back of our mind. And also, as we look about what are the objectives of the act, let's keep in mind what the objectives of the act so that we can see how they play out in the whole scope of the health sector. Great. So we get to now demystify what are the key definitions. We can start. Who is a data subject? A data subject is a natural person. It's you and me. You know, you are a data subject. So if you hear someone say, I am a data subject, or you are a data subject, just understanding what the person is saying is, it's you and me, a natural person, a person who sees, a person who can, a human being, basically. So what is personal data? Personal data is data relating to the data subject. This is information. Data is information. So what is personal data? What is your data? This is information relating to the data subject, which can be, what's your name? Where does Jane live? Remember, in our story, the receptionist asked Jane, what is your name? Where do you live? What is your postal address? Have you ever been in this hospital before? Do you have an insurance that is covering for your medical bill? That is personal to Jane, because for Jane, it's not the same. For Mary, it's not the same. For Andrew, it's not the same. That is personal data. So what is sensitive data? Sensitive data is what reveals what is so sensitive about a data subject. This can, for this case, your health status. If you can try and retract back and years ago when HIV was such a very, very serious disease in the country, that's sensitive data. What is your status, HIV status? What is your race? Are you African? Are you Asian? What is your social origin? And we live in a country where that really matters. That is sensitive data because it's sensitive because one, it can be used against you. You can, if we all know this person is HIV positive, we may tend to stigmatize the person. So that's sensitive data, and it ought to be kept private. You may ask yourself, what is processing? Processing has a scope of it. It entails collecting, just as the receptionist did to Jane. She collected the information. She recorded the information. She organized the information. And later on, we will see she will retrieve the information, and later disclosing or destroying this particular information. That in itself, all those activities are under the umbrella of processing. All that is processing data. Who is a data processor and who is a data controller? A data processor is a person or an organization that processes personal information on behalf of the data controller. I'll repeat. Who's a data processor? A data processor can be you as a specialist, as a doctor, or you can be as an organization, as a hospital, as an insurance agency, where you process personal data or sensitive data for your client on behalf of a data controller. You may ask, now who is this data controller? A data controller is a person who determines the purpose and means of processing the personal data. I'll repeat. A data controller is a person to determine the purpose and the means of processing the personal data. So from this case, the hospital that Jane went to, the data processor, and also it's a data controller. And these offices ought to be in the various organizations, as we're going to see. Now, what are the principles of data privacy under the Act? So for the Act, we saw we have objectives. Great. Secondly, the Act has principles of data privacy. So what are these principles? The principles that guide They are established under the Act and they are as follows. Firstly, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. You should always process personal data in fair, lawful, and a transparent manner. Someone you can keep in mind as Jane in this story. Someone may use her data unlawfully because we know she has TB. And she's a very bad manager, or she's a very bad advocate, because in this case now we have Jane as a lawyer. And she won a case against me in court. And I know she has TB. I can go and start telling people, actually, don't even go where she is. Jane can institute a suit against me and say, that's very unlawful because I'm using her data against her unlawfully. Data should be collected only where it's valid. Where in this case, when Jane went to hospital, she only revealed data that is relevant to the doctor. She never started telling the doctor, I am a lawyer, I work here, I live here. No. It was all about her health. So it should be transparent. Why do you need this data? It's not a malicious type of, it's not very malicious. It's not like I want this data so that I can use it against her. No. It is transparent so that I may help you. Even you as a medical practitioner, when a patient walks into your office, I'm collecting this data so that I can help, not so that I can be malicious. I am transparent with my intention. The purpose, a second and a very important principle, purpose limited. You should only process personal data to a specified and lawful purpose. In this case, what is the purpose of processing Jane's data, which is her health status? For us to be able to diagnose what she's going through, so that I can know what she's suffering from. That is the purpose. The purpose should be very clear. You see, even when the doctor and the doctor told her, we are taking your blood test so that we can be able to look at your blood, your platelets, your white blood cells, your red blood cells, so that we can see actually this is the problem that you're ailing for. That's the purpose. Data minimization. We are always encouraged to ensure that the data that we collect, like for this case, the doctor to Jane, we can call him Peter. So that Peter, the only information that Peter collects should be the minimal, but also should be purposeful and also should be transparent. We will all see all these principles ought to be at a balance. The data should be accurate, straight to the point. It's not a matter of you may have or you may not have. Or the data you're giving, you should ensure that personal data is kept up to date. Or she cannot say, we collected your data last week, but now we ought to collect it again. Even you as a data subject, you'll be like, how accurate was your previous one? It should be up to date, the one that you do. How long will you keep this data? Because for sure, Jane is going to heal from TB. She's going to heal from H. pylori. And she will want that data erased. Or if it's stored for future references, and you can always see when you go to various hospitals, like here in Kenya, most hospitals, if you go there, they'll ask you, have you ever been here before? And from that, they'll be able to go to their database and see Jane was here last year in June 23rd. And this is it. Now, the thing is, do they have the information that actually Jane was ailing from H. pylori last time? So you should even tend to ask as a data subject, as someone to know, wow, so how long will you be keeping my information? And for how long will you be having it? Also, the right to privacy. Like for Jane, it is only between, we call it doctor-patient, a fiduciary relationship. It should not be for everyone. Not everyone to know that Jane has TB. No, not everyone would want that. Not everyone will want their data or their information to be spilled everywhere. Like we know, for this case, TB is contagious. You may suffer from stigma, Like, let's even have a very practical example. COVID. I remember the time we had COVID, you would run away from anyone you would hear who has COVID. You never wanted to be in contact with those people because you knew one, it will cause death, and also you care about yourself. If you go to a hospital and you actually hear you're told you have COVID, and even you can see currently in the country, there's a currently we have a flu that's going on, and it's equivalent to pneumonia. So if you get to find out that actually you're suffering from that, you want that to be very confidential as you hear, so that you can also suffer, you cannot suffer from stigma and isolation. Even though you're going to go for isolation, that information is private to you and your doctor. Lastly, how is this data transferred? Let's have also another example. You know, you go to hospital and you're told your kidneys are failing. And in Kenya, we don't think we have a kidney transplant. You'll have to go to India. You know, for your doctor, let's say you're going to a specialist, and this specialist called John tells you, I know a doctor in India who has a good hospital where you will go and find your data, where you're going to go and find your kidney transplant study. Wow. So what will Peter do? Peter will transfer the history that amounted to the kidney failure to his friend in India, so that the friend in India can understand actually when Jane comes, this is her history with suffered, so that which has led to kidney failure. Maybe it's kidney stones, maybe you know. So you see, this is transfer of data. And any transfer of data should to be transferred outside Kenya unless there's proof that adequate data protection safeguards or consent of the data subject. So for Peter cannot transfer that data without Jane agreeing. Jane can say, no, 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 I don't want my data to go to India. I will just go there and we start afresh, the process afresh. And then when Jane gets there, Jane sees her data is already with a friend, Peter. That's crazy. Even for Jane will be like, oh my God, what has just happened? So this data already is prejudiced with information about me. You get? So those are the reasons why these principles have been put in place. Kind of let's all understand these principles, because this is what the information we have will be so powerful that even as a medical practitioner, you will be so cautious. One, you will adhere to them so that also you can protect your client. And you as a client or a patient, sorry, for this instance, you'll be able to see that once my data is collected, this is how it ought to go. This is the process. This is the law. Great. So what's the legal basis for processing personal data? You know, so that once you see the principle, the legal basis has been infringed, you can bring out a suit. You get? So the reason why we have the legal basis. So once the legal basis is infringed or it's broken, we have a suit. We have a case now to take to court. First, consent. As a data subject, as an individual, you have to consent. Consent means saying yes or no. And in this case, this is very sensitive because we're dealing about medical. This is your health status. You have to consent. Just as Jane, in our story, she has to consent to her data being transferred to India or not. That is consent. As you can see, it's an individual to consent to the processing of the personal data. I consent for Dr. Peter to process my information. I consent for Dr. Peter to transfer my data to India. You know, so you have to say yes or no because it's yours. Secondly, legitimate interest of the organization for third-party engagement. So where, let's say, you go to a hospital and they don't have a specialist. Let's say I walk into hospital X, and what I'm suffering from, just as Jane, a very good example, like the one we had, Jane, Dr. Peter was able to see Jane has a kidney problem, and I don't know anything about. I might know, but I don't have the equipment. So I'll have to call Dr. Rashid or anyone to be able to help me solve Jane's problem. Such a third party, legitimate interest. It has to have a contractual necessity. In this case, there has to be a reason as to why. Necessity, the need, legal obligation that we know that once this data is infringed, we call it the fiduciary relationship between the data subject, in this case, between the patient and the doctor. There's an obligation that the doctor ought to make, and there's an obligation that the patient has to make. It has to be of vital interest of individual where processing is necessary to protect their life, but at the best interest of the patient. In this case, Dr. Peter's best interest is to make sure that Jane is not suffering from kidney failure. That is a vital interest. Not to take her to India to die, that's not a vital interest. I hope we can all now have a framework of it. Thirdly, and lastly, the legal basis of processing data is for public interest. That's why you will see during the lockdown and during COVID, in the national news, they were able to project to us the curve of how COVID is going for public interest to be awake about it. In this case, like previously, if you've seen our news since the last week to this week, for public interest, they are cautioning us of this influenza. It's for public interest, for them to be cautious. So the data is processed for that need, for public interest. This is for hospitals, for them to process and be able to tally and tabulate all that. It's for public interest for the citizens. So as we go along, you will see the legal basis for processing data. Let's not forget the key definitions. We have looked at the principles, and now we have looked at the legal basis for processing personal data. Good. So processing of sensitive data. And we said sensitive data may be your health status, in this case, Jane H. pylori and TB, or her race, she's Asian, living in Kenya. Also, her origin, where does she come from? Her social origin as well. To process sensitive data, these are the guiding rules. Publication of by the data subject, sorry. There's legitimate activities of not-for-profit organization. There's necessity, there's the need. Here falls the vital interest, just as I said. And the sensitive personal data that is health data. So let's start. The publication by data subject, to which the processing of the personal data, which is manifestly made public by the data subject. Jane, later on, she may want to tell people, actually, the reason why I have not been coming for meetings is because I am suffering from TB, and I will not want to infect people. That is Jane as a data subject who has made it known to the public. Also, when the hospital in this case, at my mind as I'm trying to explain this, I'm trying to figure out, you may have heard stories of people who are used as guinea pigs to test certain types of medicine. They have a very unique type of disease that is not common, and the disease does not have a cure. But now scientists or laboratory practitioners are trying to find out what medicine really cures this disease. When COVID came, some people were used as guinea pigs to test if actually this is the vaccine, so that we had various types of vaccines. That is it. Not to use it without consent. And also, as we use this sensitive data that we know Jane has to be, we should first, as you can see, is consent, and two, appropriate safeguards while processing a data. And then there's necessity, as I said, the vital interest. So what are the basic rights of a data subject? So you remember, as we initially said, that so the basic rights of a data subject, we have looked at the principles, we have looked at the key definitions. So what are the rights of you as a data subject? Firstly, the information on you to which the personal data is being put. You ought to know. You ought to know, why do you want to know my health status? Why do you want to know the history of this disease? I ought to know. Two, access to this information, to your personal data. So the personal data can be, why do you want to know where I live? Why do you want to know my postal address? And why do you want, and how will you be able to be accessing it? You can also, have in mind when hospitals are, let's say, having discounts, or your specialist has discounts. You remember Jane registered her mobile number. So they keep sending you pop-outs. So this month is our dental health month. We will be having 10% discount. They are accessing your personal data. You ought to consent to it. You ought to consent for your number to be getting those pop-ups and those messages. You ought to. And if not, you ought to tell them, stop, this is my personal line. This is too much. I don't want to be receiving this kind of information. Objection to the processing of your personal data. You have a right to say no. Jane has a right to say, do not transfer my information to Dr. Peter. Also, Jane can say, I think that information I put is wrong. Please correct it. Also, delete that information. You remember I said, how long will the data be stored? So kindly delete that information. No automated decision making, where without human intervention, where you say by default. For data protection, there is no default. There is consent. So in this case, Jane has kidney failure. Her information is being transferred to Rashid, who is all the way. So when data is being transferred outside Kenya, Section 48 of the Act provides that prove to the data controller, who is the one who determines the purpose of processing of the personal data, that it has been put in place adequate safeguards, that is adequate measures why Jane's information of her health status is being taken to Dr. Rashid all the way in India. Then there's proof to the data controller that the data will be transferred to jurisdictions with commensurated data protection laws. So Jane ought to ask, does India, in case India, Dr. Rashid in India infringes my data, do those people have data protection laws? The data subject ought to know that. Also, safeguard the data from misuse and unintended disclosure. This is a kidney failure. No one wants the information about kidney failure to go all the way. So they have to be measures that ought to be put in place. Also, enter into a cross-border agreement where now we have Jane here. Next, we have Dr. Rashid and we have Dr. Peter. Dr. Peter has to say, actually, her information has gone. That's a cross-border agreement because it's from one country to another, one continent to another. Personal breaches. You may ask, so wow, so my information, what constitutes my information being used wrongly? Examples of personal breaches that let's say, and the organization may have include availability, loss, accidental or unlawful destruction of personal data. Also, alteration or unauthorized change to personal data. You know, you can go to hospital, you see last time you're suffering from H. pylori, like our friend Jane. But then she goes back and she sees, wow, you had kidney failure? No. You know, that's alteration to her personal data, which her health status personal to have. So it occurs by inadvertent action, negligent actions from the hospital to your data or consultant, and time is 72 hours that it ought to be brought to the attention of the data to the data subject. If not, 5 million or 1% of gross annual turnover of that organization. Sorry. So if you do not bring up to speed your patients about any of the data breaches of their personal breaches of their data, one, you see you have a fine of 5 million or 1% gross annual turnover of your gross annual turnover, or general penalties, which is 3 million. That is law. You cannot negate from it. And remember, ignorance of the law is no defense. So we look at sanctions. So if this organization, this specialist, or your doctor does not adhere to the data protection laws, what happens? These are the sanctions under the Data Protection Act. One, you have court-issued penalties, and secondly, administrative penalties by the Data Commissioner. So the Data Commissioner has the power to fine companies or to fine organizations a fine of up to 5 million for non-compliance of the Act. In this case, it's the ODPC, the Office of the Data Protection Commission. And also, court-issued penalties. There are specific penalties, a fine to up to 5 million or prison term of 10 years based on the nature of the offense. You will go to court and the court will be able to weigh how heavy is this offense. Also, there's compensation to the data subject. A person who suffers damages, including financial or non-financial, where the court is the one to weigh, is this a financial damage or a non-financial damage? By reason of contravention of the Act, there's compensation for them. There's also an injunction where the court may order or prohibit the doing of an act or stop continuing of any of your data from. They may stop the transfer of Jane's data on her kidney failure all the way to India. Those are the remedies. So if your data is infringed, these are the provisions that the Act provides. So yeah, thank you so much. That's the first session of our presentation today. I hope you'll be able to learn the foundation and the preliminary factors about it. And now I will leave my colleague to join.
Wow, that was such a lovely first half of the webinar. So my name is Anita and I will be taking you through the second half of the webinar, which will focus on how we can ensure that our players in the health sector are compliant. So just a quick recap of what my colleague has covered. She's talked about data processing and how the health sector comes into play. So as hospitals, as insurance companies, they're both data processors and data controllers. Right. So why as hospitals, pharmaceuticals, insurance companies, why should we be concerned about data governance? So some of the things that come into mind is that one, as stakeholders in the health sector, we have a duty to protect consumers, both in the public and private health facilities. And just to reiterate from my colleague's example of Jane, the sick patient who has pneumonia and whatnot, you can imagine the amount of information the hospital has from Jane. I mean, they probably have where she lives, they have her diagnosis, they'll have her treatment, and that is sensitive data. So that's a reason why we should be concerned about being compliant with the requirements of data protection. Another reason, specifically for players in the health sector, is to understand the requirements in law that will come into play where data protection is concerned. And this is very important because from the Digital Health Act, which I will elaborate on, there's a requirement for licensing, especially when you start using the online platforms, your MTBAs and such. So it's very important for all these stakeholders in the health sector to be compliant with data protection regulations. So before I begin discussing the Digital Health Act, it's important to note it's a fairly new act. It was passed into law last year in November, I think 20th November 2023, so it's fairly new. And as a result, it's still relies on other legislations, specifically the Data Protection Act. So I'll be using both, I'll be referring to both acts concurrently, just to explain some context for today for compliance. So we'll start with some of the types of data under the Digital Health Act. Now, the Digital Health Act provides some of the categories of data being such as sensitive personal level health data. So this is what we refer to as the medical records. Jane has pneumonia. That is sensitive personal level health data. Then we have the administrative data. So here, especially for the hospitals and the pharmaceuticals, for example, this can relate to matters pertaining to the patient, but are used for administrative purposes. So like the hospital needs to know, Jane had pneumonia. What medicine did we give her? So that would be administrative data. Then aggregate health data. So aggregate, just from the word aggregate, collection of the health data. And now this can come into play, especially where we have insurance companies, which deal with just the basic information of the customers to enable them to get their insurance covers. So if it's back to Jane, if she had an outpatient cover, for example, all those details about how she got pneumonia or if she had any conditions like diabetes, that would now count as aggregate because it's just a combination of all the health data in relation to the data subject. Then we have research for health data. So a good example I can give here is when the country was plagued with COVID, and we had the Ministry of Health, particularly having the tracing and contacting with patients so that they're able to see how fast COVID was spreading, how many people are in hospital, how many have died. And now that particularly now would inform any steps, for example, the government would like to take to cater to any future pandemic that might come. And just to understand even from a medical perspective, this COVID that is plaguing the country, what is it? What are the mutants? What can we expect? So that's also a type of data that's covered under the Digital Health Act. Now, my colleague put it really well. Why we should comply also is because of the fines involved if you're found in breach. We have the data, the ODPC issuing fines left, right, and center. I'm sure you've seen even in current affairs, we've had schools such as Goma being fined 5 million for just posting a child's photo, for example. And the other day, I think it was NIVAS, if I'm not wrong, that was being investigated for a data breach in the supermarket. So the issues of data protection are very alive in each and every sector. That being said, what are some of the compliance measures that we can put in place that pertain to the health sector? So first, we have what I call incident and disaster response drills. So here, from a cybersecurity point of view, it basically means like you conduct like an internal hacking, you have ethical hacking, which will help now see how ready, as an institution, how ready are your systems in case of breach, in case there's any interaction in terms of the data, how quick can your systems respond? So we should have an incident and disaster response mechanism set in place such that you as the hospital or you as the pharmacy can protect this data. Then we have the regular sensitization of employers and stakeholders. So this can look like having training 1 to 2 times a year, for example, for a hospital or for a pharmacy, such that you're also kept abreast on the changes within the law or what you need to do at an institutional level to be compliant. Then other measures include having an encryption policy, but this is mostly from a cybersecurity perspective. So this will mostly go back to the systems that the hospitals, the pharmaceuticals, the insurance policies, how do you protect your encryption, your data? So for example, I mostly see this with maybe banks. The way when you want to log in into your bank account, you'll have a USSD. for example, or an OTP sent to you as a bank account holder to access the account. So maybe for hospitals, it can be something different that ensures that it is only I as Jane, who can access this information on an online platform. Then, so for documentation of the data, both the hard and soft copies needs to be regulated. So here we go back to our discussion on the data controller and the data processor, and specifically at the internal level. You need to ensure that not just everybody within your hospital, within your pharmacy has access to the data. You know, for example, if it's at the administration desk for the prescription, someone who is cleaning, for example, should not be able to enter into your system to check data about Jane, right? It needs to be limited to purpose as we learned about the principles of data protection and consent. It has to be for a specific purpose, and consequently, that would mean even the people who access this information should be limited to only those who are relevant in dealing with that data. And then in case of breach, as we've earlier mentioned, from the Data Protection Act, you're supposed to report within 72 hours in case there's breach of the personal data. Now, I think we can go into a few of the questions from the chat. John Wangui, who wanted to find out whether data can be transferred to outside Kenya. So yes, John Wangui, we can transfer the data out of Kenya, but remember it has to be under very strict measures as set out by the Data Protection Commissioner under sections, I think, 48 and 49 of the Data Protection Act. There are very strict parameters that the institution in question has to fulfill, including the health sector that we're discussing today. So for example, the Data Protection Commissioner will have to be satisfied that one, probably your encryption is up to par. Number two, your cybersecurity is up to par. Number three, you know, the ODPC is able to have audits at your institution. So the short answer to the question, John Wangui, is yes, the transfer can happen, but under very strict parameters under the Data Protection Act. What are some of the ways hospitals can ensure that their client data is up to date? So I think here is where you have to involve different stakeholders when it comes to management of your data. So first things first, probably you'll have to have someone from a cybersecurity expert who will be able to enable one, your data is safe. To even just internal mechanisms that you come up with as a hospital. So maybe this looks like, I don't know, having people at the administration desk filling in your prescription for the patient, for example, probably on a daily basis. But yeah, so this will probably be both an internal process and external experts, such as your cybersecurity expert will be involved to ensure that now the client data is up to date. Also, let me mention at this point from the Digital Health Act, there's a minimum requirement of, I think, around 20 years in which now the players in the health sector, your hospitals, your insurance companies are supposed to hold. I think it's 20 years. So that's just an add-on. Then another question is, then for the data that is not updated, this answers it. Hospitals are supposed to export it from their systems. Yes, after how long? So this is probably 20 years. You have to have that information on record for about 20 years.
I have a question. Yes, I just wanted to know if a data controller is vicariously liable for the inadvertent actions of the data processor.
Yes. So in this case, I gave an example. The data controller, in this case, who is the office of the Data Protection Commissioner. They are they have the oversight for any data protection suit or anything revolving around data protection. So that's a yes. Yes, Boniface, go ahead.
Yeah, we understand that in our country, our laws do not allow same-sex, but we
Yes.
understand that that is it can come up with what we call health issues. We have people who can have like we can have like anal sexual uh, transmitted infections, and they have to be treated in hospitals. So how are these people protected? Because we understand that their rights, and our medical practitioners are always in breach of their rights, and especially when it comes to disclosure. You will see a physician or a medical caregiver who is so shocked and wants even to go and gossip out about, oh, this one is a homosexual, these are gay, such like things. How does then law like how do we ensure privacy of this particular data of this individual?
Thank you, Boniface. Actually, I'm happy about that question because actually there are so many cases in court about that. And currently there is one that's going all the way to the Court of Appeal in line of the same agenda, or let's say with the same subject matter. But what I can say is when I initially started, that is personal data. It doesn't, it's like TB, the people with HIV. So even annual infections, even they are not, let's say, same-sex intercourse is not allowed in the country. That is correct. Secondly, but now we have this patient who has come to me as a doctor, and I've been able to find out that is what they are ailing from. I am under an obligation. The law does not provide for loopholes. It does not say if this type of information is the only information we keep. Remember, as a data subject, you have a right. Secondly, you have remedies under the law that are put, just as I had presented before. There are sanctions. One of them is an injunction. The court might stop an injunction, just as I said, or they may put an order to stop the use of that data against the person. And also, the data subject can get compensation. And all these things you will see if you look at such unique cases, it's how you argue them out in court. And mainly, this is where the ODPC comes in. The main aim of the ODPC is to protect the data subject. So trust me, these people are well protected, their data is well protected, and it goes all the way to court and they get compensated.
Just a
Any
concern.
other-
Yes,
Yes, yes, yes.
just
Go
a
ahead, go ahead,
concern.
go ahead. Yes.
Do you think a health provider can then, is the health provider then has a right, like to say, now that this is prohibited and I've ascertained that so and so is perpetrating this, like same sex.
Yes.
We know that it's prohibited.
Yes.
Do you think a medic can rightfully use that information to disclose to the to the, I think, to the police this data?
Okay. I can respond to it and say no. Because, firstly, that is personal data, as we have said. It doesn't matter what I am doing, I may be doing the wrong thing, but that is my personal data. Even according to, if you read the Data Protection Act, you will see it is wholesome. It doesn't have loopholes in it. So, when I say loopholes, the doctor may say, we do not permit same-sex intercourse. So you're violating this right. The data subject will go to court and say, this is my data. I entrusted you with it. And as I was presenting, I told you there's some principles. It has to be lawful. It has to be transparent. Where are they collecting this data and where are they using it? So because as a data subject, I'll say, one of the principles highlighted is transparency. So you're using this for whose best interest? What's the purpose? What's the purpose? Where are you collecting? Why are you even using this information to anyone? Mm-hmm. You know? So, Boniface, you're getting what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I'm getting what you are trying to say, because
Mhm.
in most of the time, you see, these are the people who I had somebody say that they are the scum of the earth. I think that was so unfair to them, but then I think there is a sense in which DPA must protect them, and I think their only problem is that ignorance of their rights as to privacy is concerned. And I think if this happens, then the medics in the house should know that they are committing a grievous breach of data. And if that gets to them, and they breach it on a daily basis, and I know even right now it's happening somewhere. Like the medics, you can even hear somebody shouting, "Yule mama wa mjamzito," like, you see, that's personal data. It is not want to disclose. Maybe it's still even at its initial stages, and you do not want to disclose. And yeah, that's how the medics visit that breaches against us.
Yeah, because you'll tend to see Boniface, you're empowered. You have the information that you know this is personal data. You may find out only a third of the people in the nation who actually know what personal data is. So they may not use it, they may not even institute a SIP. Even the way you have said, they may bring it out or they take it to court. I have just remembered another case that's actually in court where an intersex person, in Kenya we recognize only male and female. Intersex people, their bill is still in court about to recognize them because they are neither male or female. And one of them was applying for Kenya Defense Forces. And one of the police there told this particular applicant, why are you making a line in the men's line? Because her physique, she's a man, but inside her internal, she's a woman. So she's like, she's neither male or female, she's intersex. So the police was like, oh my God, what are you saying? So the police just busted out and just told everyone, come and see. We have someone who doesn't know, someone who is weird, someone who's queer, someone who is this. Like, these people should be banned, they should be stoned to death. And you see, that was her personal data. And the court ruled in her favor. The fact that that data was used against her because she missed the application, she got stigma. You can find that case in the Kenya Law Report. But I agree with you. Not everyone knows about their personal data, and there's a lot of stigma. Thank you so much, Bonte. Any more questions?
And maybe just not to labor. And
Yes.
there is another concern. You realize that most of our health facilities have always played as data processors without their knowledge, especially with the proliferation of these technologies. You realize that we need data, health data, for artificial intelligence and making up decisions based on how treatments can be delivered, maybe through machine learning and artificial intelligence. You will see some research organizations, they will come and want to get data from the hospitals. I just wonder whether these health facilities understands what we normally talk about, statistical disclosure control measures, like anonymizing this data so that by the time they share out the data, they share data that is well anonymized and they have protected the data subjects.
I agree with you, because that's why this year we are dealing with data protection. So even to get to reach and tell these institutions that actually, hi guys, so you're processing data, because trust me, most of them don't know, and it's ignorant. That's why I said you took an initiative, and it's such a good initiative to join our webinar today, because now you know all about data protection. So I agree with you. Just as I had said, a third of the people in the country know about data protection, and there's so many. I agree with you, Bunty. Anyone else in the platform leave a question or an inquiry or a comment before we end our session today?
I have a question.
Yes, Henry.
My question is regarding some of the social places where they put up a communication that someone is, you're consenting by virtue of entering that premise for them to take your photograph and use it for maybe social media and the likes. So is this a correct, appropriate way allowed within the Data Protection Act that allows for a data subject to provide consent?
So let's say you're going to, okay, maybe if I can repeat your question so that I can see if I've understood it. When you go to this social, let's say social clubs, you see posters that are said by you entering, it's fine. So you've consented to your data.
Yes, that's the question. Yes.
Great. So consent comes in various forms. There's consent where you see, like when you go to hospital, your consent might be in writing that yes, you can process my data. Just as my colleague had said, for banks, it's an OTP that is sent to your phone. Then you consent, yes, you can log in into my bank account. So for these types of businesses, by you entering into their place, you've consented. Yes, you've consented to taking of your pictures. But now the question that comes: how will they process it? How will they process and how will they store your data? You ought to know. And also, what do you call them? Businesses. I'm so tempted to call them organizations. Should have data protection policies. So in these policies, when push comes to shove and your data is out there, do they have a policy? Did they make your policy aware? If you go to most Naivas supermarkets, where we have a customer care desk, they have their policy and they have their notice. By you being in their premises, you have consented. And the notice, the policy is well written there. So you can either consent or not consent. Yes. So you have a choice to either say yes or no. So if you go to such a gathering, you are aware first. You're aware that your data will be taken as a data subject. So you're aware of that. So once you enter, when your data is taken, or when your data is, and if you still want to either say yes or no, you go to either I think we always have what do you call them? Not a human resource or someone who is in charge of that department, because such organizations have to have a data processor. So if your data is infringed, that one you just have to bring a lawsuit. And yeah, my colleague has something to add on. Maybe you can just say again.
All right.
So maybe just to add on a few more pointers to some of the questions, I can start with what Boniface had raised about how the law applies in a way to hospitals dealing with the sensitive data. So in addition to what my colleague has mentioned, we have some governing principles under the Digital Health Act that are going to be put into account as this act comes into application. It's already enacted, it's just not that the institutions are familiarizing themselves with it. So some of these principles: improvement of the client health, safeguard of individuals and communities against harm and violations. So this goes back to the discussion we've just had from the Data Protection Act about protecting the individual or the data subject. When this patient, Jane, is giving the information, is it informed? Does she know what it is for? Is it for a specific purpose, such that if Jane is giving you her information for diagnosis purposes, you see, you're not going to be allowed now to start leaking other things that will come up. Like, I don't know, for example, you can start saying, she paid 5,000. If you get any other information that's not necessarily for the diagnosis, you see, you won't be allowed to release that information. Then we also have other principles such as the equity and accountability principles. So you see, that part now brings in the compliance measures that the other institutions will be required to put in place. Because you see, at the end of the day, when the Data Protection Commissioner is coming after you as the organization, they want to go after Jane. Jane will go and make a complaint at the ODPC. It is the hospital, it is the pharmacy, it is the insurance that is going to be found liable. So such principles will come into play. Yes, I just wanted to add like that caveat. And then also bearing in mind, especially for the Digital Health Act, since it's still new, still relies heavily on the Digital Protection Act. So for any ambiguities, they can call them that, in this act presently, the Data Protection Act will come into play. So all the things about the rights of the data subject come into play. All the penalties and sanctions that the ODPC can apply will come into play, and so on and so forth. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call it. I'd like to bring this webinar to a close. Thank you so much for your participation. Yes, Boniface.
Yeah, I think this one could be slightly like personal, but my question is, I've been following you guys up and just learning as a data governance officer. So my question is, have you ever thought of just delivering a course, data privacy and technology, whereby we can even come up with the statistical disclosure controls and just a full packed course that somebody can then subscribe, even if it's paid? Like I've seen Harvard School of Business offering such courses. Like you people have the legal background. We have statisticians with the statistical disclosure control backgrounds. And then the technical people, like the IT experts on how just to come up with a course that is all encompassing, so that as we encourage even people in the health sector to have data governance, the question is how qualified are these data governance officers? That's just my concern, my question.
That's a really good proposal, Boniface. Allow us to look deeper into that. That's a very good proposal to look into. Thank you so much for that suggestion. I think for now, allow me to conclude our webinar for today. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining the webinar.